Tennessee loomed large in the struggles of World War II. 300,000 served in combat. Nearly 6,000 were killed. 280,000 churned out armament and ordnance. 6 Tennesseans received the Congressional Medal of Honor, and Cordell Hull was President Roosevelt's Secretary of State. On this edition of West Tennessee Journal, we share some of the memories and feelings of 4 West Tennessee veterans.
Well, it's hard to believe, but we all thought we'd be home by Easter. How naive we were. We soon found out that it wasn't that way.
When you were 19, 20 years old, the war was going on, and you knew you were going to have to go sooner or later. And my only thought about it, I knew I was going, so what? But I didn't want to have to dig a foxhole. So I took the exam for the aviation cadet program. A friend of mine here in Ripley, and I went to Memphis over on Front Street in the Federal Building. And that's where the recruiting office was then. And took the exam. And we passed the IQ test. And whoever was in charge says, step back to this room, so-and-so. So we went back there and they gave us a physical, and then some lieutenant, I guess it was a lieutenant, I didn't pay much attention back then, said, step in this room, please, men. We stepped in there and he says, raise your right hand and repeat after me. And we did that and we were sworn in right then.
The whole country was involved in the war effort. It's not like now you can either be for Vietnam or for Korea or not for the war, but then the entire country, we had been attacked at Pearl Harbor, and so the entire country was involved in trying to help the war.
I guess if you could say that it was a good war. But it was a terrible war.
After meeting Adolf Hitler during a 1937 Rotary tour, Tennessee Governor Prentice Cooper was convinced America would have to go to war. Tennessee established the first state defense organization and in 1941 created the Tennessee State Guard when the National Guard was called into the regular army. Land was set aside for military use, and in West Tennessee alone, B-17 bomber crews were trained near Halls. Dirigibles and POWs were handled at Fort Tyson near Paris. An Air Ferry Command flew out of Memphis. Millington hosted the largest inland naval base, and ordnance flowed out of Milan.
In a sense, no war is good, but as wars go, I guess it was good in the sense that we had a good cause. The whole of American Western civilization was hanging by a thread at one time during that war. And Hitler, of course, had conquered up, was in control of all the continent of Europe, and a big part of North Africa. He'd gone all the way to Egypt. And he was finally stopped at El Alamein by the 8th Army in Montgomery, and principally because we sent so many tanks and guns and stuff in there to him that he had a tremendous preponderance of power. And the Germans had stretched their supply line so far that they were running short of gasoline for their tanks and everything else, and so he was able to drive them clear back across Libya to Tunisia. But had he not stopped them there, they could easily have linked up with the Japanese in India. The Japanese had already controlled all of Southeast Asia, and they would have controlled the world.
I was ready to fight. I was pumped up, ready to fight. Just lost my brother, wanted to kill some damn Japs. You know, that was and I don't cuss, but that was your attitude back then. And I don't, unless I get mad anyway. But that was my attitude then. I was ready to go. I wanted to get even.
We hated Hitler and the Japanese. We despised and hated, and that was one thing that united the whole country in the war effort of World War II, was because Hitler was the epitome of evil to us, and that was how we felt about him. But now, one of my favorite little friends in my church studies in Germany to learn how to speak German. I haven't forgiven her quite entirely, but I'll get over it eventually.
I don't think any war would be a good war. If I hadn't have give the pictures that I had of the concentration camps to my friend that carried them away and kept them, you would look at them and you'd understand why it was necessary, why the war was necessary, to see the number of people and how they were treated. Something had to be done to stop it, because it was going to spread.
Everybody was involved in World War II. It wasn't just a question of a few. The whole country was involved. We had been attacked, and the whole country was involved in the effort. And so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary to be involved. Everybody was.
As I recall, most of us were saying, well, let's get over and get it over with so we can get back. So we were not at all reluctant to go. It was just a matter of getting the job done.
All available women pilots were who had a pilot license and so many hours were contacted by Jacqueline Cochran, who was good friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was the leading woman pilot in the United States at that time. And so she recruited women pilots to go into it was the first time women had ever performed military duty as aviators. The mission of the women being in the Air Force was to release a man for overseas. We took all of his domestic duties over.
So they put us on a train, put us on what they call 40 and 8. 40 men or 8 horses is what they, and these boxcars came from World War I. That's how antiquated they were. But we rode them, and we rode them far enough that we could hear ammunition exploding up on the front line. We still didn't have a rifle. So they gave us a rifle, and it was wrapped in cosmoline and wax paper. And that's how new it was. And there we were with a rifle packed in cosmoline, and the Germans probably 2 miles ahead of us.
We were in the biggest convoy that had ever been assembled. Nearly 900 ships, 800 and some odd ships. And as you remember, the East Coast up and down the Atlantic up and down the East Coast, the Germans had sunk dozens and dozens of Allied ships. And the Atlantic was just alive with German submarines. They assembled this convoy in Chesapeake Bay. We left from Norfolk. We didn't know what our destination was until we got out to sea. And it took 21 days because the speed of the convoy was limited to the slowest ship. We went all the way up to Iceland, clear down to the equator, and then at the last moment ran up the coast of Africa there to where we landed at the little port of Safi, which was the southernmost landing of the Western Task Force that was commanded by General Patton on November the 8th, 42.
Of course, you've always got some that that objected and showed the objection and all that. But I think most of us felt like, well, it's a job to do. We're going to do it.
Oh, I was scared for 3 years. Anybody that isn't scared is a moron or an idiot or somebody. Anybody that isn't telling would be scared to death, but you just have to do what you have to do in spite of being scared. You put your scared behind you and go on and do what you have to do.
We were talking about food or something, and I said, well, that's pretty good. It tastes like so-and-so. Well, if you had never tasted so-and-so, you wouldn't know what I was talking about. And that's the same thing with when they give you that rifle. You've never been there before. And there was nobody that could explain to you exactly what the fear was.
First people we fought in North Africa, of all things, was the French Foreign Legion when we landed. You know, France was divided into pro-Vichy and anti-Vichy or pro-Allied. And it was that way all through the French colonies in North Africa among the officials. But we landed at Safi, and it was just a short, sharp battle that lasted a couple of days there. Then we marched all the way up through Casablanca to Port Leoti. And we stayed there for a couple of months until they decided whether or not Franco was going to come in on with the Axis or the Allies. Had he decided to come in with the Axis, he could have crossed the short space there at the Straits of Gibraltar and been right in the rear of the Allied forces. So we had to stay there for a while to determine what Franco was going to do.
It was a new experience entirely, and but I'm adaptable. I was then, and I never had any problem with it. And I was eager to fly. It was exciting. You know, all the movies during that time had Jimmy Stewart and all these other guys up there flying those P-51 fighters and dog fights and all that. It looked exciting, and that's what I wanted. I was a little disappointed when they sent me to multi-engine training too, but that's the way it was. And the colonel said, that's the way it's going to be, boy.
Flying for the military is not just flying. You had to fly precisely. If they said fly at a certain level, you had to stay right at that level. When you did chandelles, whatever you did had to be done precisely. And that was the biggest difference, was flying was not fun, it was hard work. That is the reason why I cannot get air conditioning or any cold air on my face. You see, my face got frostbitten flying that open cockpit in December and January and February, and my feet and my face, and I had a time with that.
I had the whole battalion behind me in a column of twos. And I'd get down in the ditch beside the road, and they'd throw a blanket over me and my flashlight, and I'd look at that aerial photograph, which was taken from about 20,000 feet with a few clouds to keep you from seeing everything. And I was trying to keep on this little trail to where we were going. And we walked through there, walked right through the German army there, and we came so close to the artillery we could smell the bacon frying and hear them giving orders. But we were right by them, and if we came to a house or somewhere, we'd drop somebody else to guard it and go on by, and then he'd drop in on the tail. And we came out on this bluff, just over there, from Bonn on the Rhine River. Down below us was a big German headquarters. You could see them. You'd see the command cars come in, you know. And when they'd get a good crowd there, well, I'd drop a little artillery on top of them. They had no idea we were there, of course. We hadn't been there but a short time till I got orders to come back out. Said they've captured the bridge over the Rhine at Remagen. And I was about 20 miles up the Rhine from Remagen. And so they said trucks will be made available to you as they are. So, but we'd passed all these Germans coming in, and we had to do a little fighting to get back out.
Took up our position in this building, and we were to observe, and we had the walkie-talkie to report anything that we saw. Well, it got cold. This was in January. About the 1st of February, I guess. And it was very cold. So we got to rubbing each other's legs over above our combat boots to keep circulation going. And a couple of days later, we were talking, and he said, "You know, my legs are sore. What's happening?" And I said, "Well, mine are also." And we got to looking, and we'd rub the hair off of each other's legs, trying to stay warm.
We lived outdoors that whole time, out all through North Africa there until we got to England and through Sicily. We got to England just before Christmas of 1944, and they had some nice warm barracks for us. They put us in these nice warm barracks, and in a week, half the outfit was in the hospital with pleurisy and pneumonia and colds and everything else. We never had a cold when we was laying out on the ground in the rain and the snow and everything else, but when we got in the warm barracks, it nearly killed us.
One girl got in her plane one morning and there was a rattlesnake in the cockpit. Man, did we ever examine our cockpits after that.
The life expectancy of a platoon leader, second lieutenant platoon leader, was measured in weeks. And they were pretty expendable. I mean, in combat, why rifle platoon leaders didn't last very long.
Each platoon had a runner. Now this runner was a man that would go back and forth from the company rear command to the front line. And he would take messages from the front line, the commander, to the rear command. Well, they designated me as runner. I was lucky. They gave me a good job. I think the last two didn't make it. And I discovered on my way there was a strange sound, and I could hear a strange sound, and it sounded like you'd break a stick or break a pencil. I thought, what in the world is this? So I got back to the rear command post, and I was telling somebody back there, and it was some old sergeant that was in on D-Day. He said, I was telling him about this noise. It sounded like a break a stick or a pencil. He said, "Stuart," he said, "that's bullets passing by you." He said, "As long as you hear them, you're all right." He said, "The ones you don't hear is the ones that are the bad ones." And from then on, every time I'd hear a stick or pencil crack, I'd hit the ground because I know there'd be some more behind it.
In war, a small skirmish is just as important to the men engaged in it as the biggest battle that was ever fought. We were approaching El Hamra Ridge and big mountains behind it, and it was a disastrous experience for the division because although we had had a little bit of combat when we landed, fighting the Foreign Legion, we were still a relatively green division. And no green division is ever very good until they get shot up a time or two and get the weak sisters weeded out, see who can do the job and who can't. And we were against probably the best troops, as good troops as the world has ever seen, the Africa Corps, commanded by Rommel. Just over the ridge, we could hear these German machine guns just raising sand with the 1st Battalion, which was to our left and had run into some barbed wire. And they were firing down the ridge at the 1st Battalion there, over the ridge from us. We could hear them. And the company commander, Richard Whitner was my company commander, from Akron, Ohio. And he said, "I'm going to take the 1st platoon and go around and see if I can get in a place to put some fire on those machine guns." And said, "When I give you the signal, you take company headquarters, which is about 4 or 5 men, radio operators and runners and so forth, and charge those machine guns." and let's get him. I didn't like the plaid, but it wasn't my plaid. But he got around there, but he couldn't ever get exactly where he wanted to get fire on these guns, but he gave me the signal to go, so we took up the ridge there. I guess it's probably 75, maybe 100 yards. I didn't have quite as much weight as the other men did. I only had a pistol. That's all I had. They had Tommy guns and ammunition and M1 rifles and so forth. And I didn't notice, but when I got to the top of the ridge, I was by myself. They were coming, but they were about 25 or 30 yards behind me. So I thought, well, this is foolish. I'm going to jump over there anyway to see what's going on. So I jumped over the ridge, and I hit right in the middle of about 6 or 8 Germans and 2 heavy machine guns that were firing the other way. And I killed the first 3 Germans that were the closest ones to me with my pistol. But they didn't look like they were dead, and they was trying to get their weapons, and I shot them all again. I had 8 shots in my pistol, 7 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. So I shot 2 of them 3 times, to be sure. Now the others, they could have killed me. But they didn't. The element of surprise, I guess, was in my favor, because when I jumped in the middle of them shooting, they took off running down the hill. And I thought, oh man, I'm out of ammunition here. But I did have enough sense to jump back over the ridge. I said, I got some more on my belt right here. So I jumped back over the ridge and reloaded. And in the excitement of the moment, what I should have done is killed about 6 or 8 of them. And I didn't kill but 3. I was sorry I didn't do a little better job.
I can't say for sure that I ever killed a German soldier. But there was, when they would retreat, several men would start firing. There would be some of them killed. And you didn't know which one it was that really killed him. Never did know. Didn't want to know.
It made men out of them. Those who were overseas in combat, which is the only ones that I had any connection with, they went off young boys and they came back men. Because I mean, you don't go into active combat killing people and come away from that without it having an indelible impression on you.
There's no advance notice about a mortar shell coming out. It just, bam, it's there. The artillery, you hear it coming in, and you can soon begin to sort of pick out where it's going to hit by the sound of it. You can see it's going to hit out there in the field, unless it's coming right in on you. Then.
I had dug this foxhole, laid this dirt out, piled it up for protection. But for some reason, I got out and got back in my foxhole. And I stayed there a little bit, and for another reason, I got out. Laid my rifle back up on this, and I was waiting for the lieutenant to come around. And I heard in the distance the plump. And I'd already heard them enough to know that, and when counting them, that they was going to land pretty close. So it wasn't, it might have been 30 seconds. There was one landed in the foxhole. Now I had dug it for protection, and had I stayed in it, it wouldn't have been any protection. But as I was there pondering what had happened, up on the top the bullets went to the side of me, and the mortar round went in my foxhole. I thought, well, somebody's looking after me. There's not really much way, as I said, that anyone can explain how it feels when you know that in the next minute the bullet might be for you.
I had a tank destroyer. It was right in the head of, up near the head of the column. And he starts up the path there. Well, the path is like this, and his tracks are like this on it. They don't go down on the thing. So he throws a track right there in the middle of that path. So there's 30 tons of steel sitting there and trees on each side of it. You couldn't move the darn thing. And it was going to get light pretty soon. We had to go. We couldn't take time to try to move that tank destroyer out of the thing. So we had to go around it and go up there with nothing, just what we could hand carry, just rifles. And you think about taking a town that way with pillboxes and everything, with a bunch of tired, worn out men with nothing but rifles. It's a pretty tough undertaking. But we got up there, and as we started to just before we broke out of the edge of the woods to start across this plain toward the town, the darndest snowstorm, a hail I've ever seen in my life. The wind was blowing 90 miles an hour. That hail was coming so hard you couldn't look at it. You just turn your back to it. So we went across there. We could look across there and see where we were going. The German had some artillery, horse-drawn artillery, and their horses ran away over there, with that, getting out of that hail there. And we walked all the way across there, never had a shot fired at us because they had their back hunched up to it too. And we went right across there and got around them and took it down. And so it was one of those places that you ask if God was on your side, he must have been.
Next time on West Tennessee Journal.
I think if the United States had not fought it, Hitler would have conquered the world. We'd have been isolated. I don't know whether they'd eventually come over here, you know. They even had plans to go across from West Africa there across to South America. And I think the United States would have been isolated completely if we hadn't gotten into the war. Because had we not gotten in, England would have eventually fallen. If we hadn't, without our help, Hitler would have invaded England, and it would have been a different world.
We continue our visit with 4 West Tennessee World War II veterans.